Courtroom was so quiet, you could hear the fluorescent lights humming overhead when the recording started playing. My daughter-in-law's voice filled the room, calm and deliberate, like she was reading a grocery list. We just need to get the power of attorney signed before he figures out what we're doing. Once that's done, the accounts transfer automatically. He won't be able to touch any of it. Then my son's voice. What if he contests it? He can't contest it if he's in memory care. That's the whole point. The prosecutor let the silence sit for a long moment before he clicked off the recording. I watched my son's face from the gallery. He was staring at the table in front of him. 41 years old, and he couldn't look up. I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Edward Galloway. I'm 68 years old. For 32 years, I worked as a forensic accountant for the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit out of the Phoenix field office. I have spent my career following money, reading between the lines of spreadsheets, finding the lie buried underneath the legitimate transaction. I retired in 2019 with a commendation and a pension and a house in Scottsdale that I'd paid off completely, and I thought the hardest part of my life was behind me. I was wrong about that. My son is Logan. He was a good kid, honestly. Not exceptional. He struggled in school, had a short attention span, never quite landed in a career the way I'd hoped. But he was good-hearted. He coached Little League for 3 years when he was in his late 20s. He called me every Sunday for most of his 30s. When his mother passed from ovarian cancer in 2017, he drove from Denver to Scottsdale and stayed with me for 2 weeks without being asked. I thought I knew him. He met Tara in 2021 at some kind of real estate investment seminar in Denver. She was 36, twice divorced, worked in property management. She was beautiful in a very deliberate way, the kind of woman who makes every room aware of her the moment she walks in. I noticed that about her the first time Logan brought her home for Thanksgiving. I also noticed that she spent most of the meal asking questions about my house, my retirement accounts, my pension structure. At the time, I told myself she was just making conversation. They got engaged in 8 months, married in 14. I paid for the rehearsal dinner. The shift was gradual at first. Logan stopped calling on Sundays. When I visited Denver, Tara was always home, always present, always steering the conversation. She started referring to my Scottsdale property as the estate, which I found odd since it's a 4-bedroom ranch house on a cul-de-sac, not Downton Abbey. She asked twice about whether I had a will. She asked once, very casually, whether I'd ever considered moving somewhere with more support, and mentioned a memory care facility in Tempe, like she'd been researching it already. I'm a forensic accountant. I spent 32 years following money and finding the lie. I know what a pattern looks like. In March of 2022, Logan called me, actually called, which he hadn't done in weeks, and asked if he and Tara could come stay for a weekend. Said they wanted to spend time with me. Said Tara had really been wanting to connect. I said of course. They arrived on a Friday evening. Tara brought wine. Logan seemed nervous in the specific way he got when he was a teenager and had done something he didn't want to tell me about. A slight tightness around the eyes, a laugh that came half a second too late. Over dinner, Tara asked again about my assets, this time more specifically. She asked about the brokerage accounts, whether the house was in a trust, who my financial advisor was. I answered carefully and watched her process each answer like she was logging it somewhere. Saturday morning, I found Logan alone in my home office. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there, looking at the filing cabinet. When he heard me come in, he startled like I'd caught him. Looking for something? I asked. He said he'd just wandered in. I believed him for about 40 seconds, and then I didn't. That afternoon, while they were by the pool, I went through my filing cabinet and checked what was there. Nothing was missing. But I noticed the lock on the cabinet had scratches on it that hadn't been there before. Fresh ones. After they left Sunday, I drove to Home Depot and bought a security camera system. 8 cameras, interior and exterior. I installed them myself over the course of 2 evenings. I also called my attorney, a woman named Diane. Not a name from the file, I'll note, but someone I trusted for 15 years, and I asked her to help me draw up an updated estate plan. Not because anything had happened yet, just because I knew what a pattern looked like. Diane asked why I was doing this now, after already having a will and a revocable trust in place. I told her I'd seen the look on my daughter-in-law's face when she asked about the brokerage accounts. Diane had been a trust and estates attorney for 25 years. She understood immediately. We spent 3 sessions getting everything ironclad. The house, the retirement accounts, the brokerage portfolio, everything locked into a structure that would require court intervention to contest, with explicit language about my cognitive capacity and a standing letter from my physician, Dr. Gunter Rosario, certifying my mental competence as of that date. I also added a specific clause, at my own insistence, that anyone who made a legal challenge to the estate without documented grounds would be automatically disinherited. Diane raised an eyebrow when I asked for that one. I told her I hoped I'd never need it. I set up the cameras to feed to a cloud account only I had access to. Then I called my son and told him I'd love to have him and Tara down for a longer visit in the Forg. Maybe a week, I said. I'd been feeling a little lonely since retiring, I said. It would mean a lot to me to have family close. Every word of that was true except the last sentence. They arrived in October. Tara was warmer than she'd ever been, attentive, helpful, laughing at my jokes. Logan was still nervous but trying to hide it better. The first 2 days were almost pleasant. I almost wondered if I'd been wrong. Then, on the third evening, after dinner, when they thought I'd gone to bed, the cameras caught them at the kitchen table with my mail. Not just looking through it, they'd opened envelopes, my bank statements, my property tax bill, a letter from my brokerage. Tara had a notepad and was writing things down. Logan was on his phone, and I could see him taking photos of the documents. I didn't come downstairs. I lay in bed and watched the camera feed on my phone and felt something settle cold and final in my chest. This was not paranoia. This was not misreading the situation. This was my son and his wife going through my financial records at 11:30 at night while they thought I was asleep. The next morning I made eggs and toast and didn't say a word about it. Over the following 2 days, the cameras caught 3 more incidents. Tara going through my filing cabinet. The new one, which I'd left unlocked with decoy documents inside. Logan on his phone in the back bedroom having a conversation where I could clearly read his lips forming the words, power of attorney. And on the last evening, the conversation I would eventually hear played back in a federal courtroom. We just need to get the power of attorney signed before he figures out what we're doing. I had called my contact at the Phoenix FBI field office the week before. A woman named Special Agent Torres, who I'd worked alongside for 6 years before my retirement. I didn't explain everything on the phone. I just said I had a situation developing that might involve financial fraud and elder abuse, and asked if she could point me to the right resources. She was at my house within 48 hours of that call. When she watched the camera footage, she didn't say anything for a long time. Then she said, "Ed, you know we can't use this until there's an actual crime." "I know," I told her. "I'm not asking you to arrest anyone yet. I'm asking you to be ready." Logan and Tara left after a week. They hugged me at the door. Tara said we'd have to do this again soon. I said I'd love that. 3 weeks later, Logan called and said he'd been thinking about my estate planning and had I ever considered a financial power of attorney because given my age, it might be worth having someone I trusted able to manage my affairs if anything happened to me. This suggestion was delivered with exactly the casual concern of a man who had been coached to deliver it casually. I said that was a great idea and I'd look into it. The following week, he emailed me a link to a notary service and asked if I'd be interested in doing it over video call, just to keep things simple. The notary he was recommending wasn't affiliated with any firm I recognized. I sent the link to Torres. She came back to me 24 hours later. The notary service was real, but the specific notary Logan was recommending had twice been flagged in complaints related to fraudulent document signings in Maricopa County. Not charged, not convicted, but flagged, the kind of thing that would never show up in a casual search. I told Logan I had my own notary and would take care of it myself. Over the next month, Logan called more frequently than he had in 2 years, always circling back to the same subject: estate planning, my health, whether I had anyone to check in on me regularly, whether I'd thought about updating my beneficiary designations. Tara sent me a card for my birthday with a handwritten note saying how much I meant to her, which would have been touching if I hadn't seen her going through my bank statements at midnight on camera. Then in January, they drove down from Denver and showed up at my door unannounced. I let them in, made coffee. We sat in the living room and for 20 minutes we talked about nothing: the weather, Logan's job, which had changed again, a trip they were thinking about taking to Portugal, and then Tara set a folder on the coffee table. "We put together some paperwork," she said, "just to protect you. It's a financial power of attorney and a healthcare directive, standard forms. We just want to make sure you're taken care of." She slid the folder toward me and smiled. The smile was warm and practiced. Logan was watching the carpet. I opened the folder. The financial power of attorney was not a standard form. It gave Logan and Tara joint authority over all my accounts, real property, and investment assets, effective immediately rather than upon incapacity, with no oversight requirement and no expiration. The healthcare directive had a section I'd never seen in a legitimate form. It gave them authority to make residential placement decisions for me if two licensed physicians certified cognitive decline, and it listed a specific memory care facility in Tempe as the preferred placement. The same facility Tara had mentioned casually 2 years ago. I looked up from the folder. "Where did you get these forms?" I asked. "Online," Tara said. "We had a lawyer look them over." "Which lawyer?" A small pause. "Someone Logan works with." I closed the folder and set it back on the table. "I appreciate the thought," I said. "Let me have my own attorney review it before I sign anything." "You understand." Tara's smile stayed fixed, but her eyes went flat. Logan finally looked up from the carpet, and what I saw on his face was not concern for his father. It was calculation. He was doing math. "Of course," Tara said. "Take all the time you need." They left 2 hours later. Before they reached the end of the driveway, I had photographed every page of that folder and emailed it to Doris and Diane. Diane called me back in 40 minutes. "Ed," she said, "this is not a standard form. This is not even close to a standard form. Where did this come from?" I told her. She was quiet for a moment. "The Placement Authority Clause. Do you know what that could be used for?" I told her I had a pretty good idea. Doris called an hour after that. The immediate POLA structure and the specific memory care facility led her to a name, a man in Scottsdale who had twice been sued in civil court for helping family members commit financial elder abuse. Both suits had settled out of court. He wasn't a lawyer. He was a notary and document preparer who marketed himself to people who needed paperwork to look official without actually being official. His name was not in my contact list, but it was about to be. Over the next 3 months, with Torres coordinating and Diane documenting, we built the case. Torres connected me with a colleague who specialized in financial elder abuse prosecutions. They set up a monitored email account to track any further communications Logan and Tara sent me. They subpoenaed Logan and Tara's financial records with a judge's approval and found that Logan had taken out a second mortgage on their Denver townhouse and that Tara had transferred $34,000 out of her own accounts in the previous year. They were cash poor and increasingly desperate. They also found, buried in Logan's bank records, a payment of $8,500 to the document preparer in Scottsdale. In April, Torres called me and said they had enough to move forward. That week, Logan called and asked again about the paperwork, and I told him I'd been speaking with my attorney and I had some questions, and I'd love for him and Tara to come down and go over everything together in person so we could all be on the same page. They came down the following Saturday. We sat at my dining room table. I had arranged for Diane to be present, which I told them was just because I wanted my attorney involved in any financial discussions. Tara's eyes flickered when she saw Diane, but she kept her composure. Logan shook Diane's hand and smiled like a man who had convinced himself everything was going to be fine. I told them I'd reviewed the forms and I had concerns. Tara started to explain. The explanation was rehearsed and smooth and landed about 6 inches away from anything resembling the truth. I let her finish. Then I slid a folder of my own across the table. Inside was a copy of my actual estate plan, notarized and on file with the court. A letter from Dr. Rosario dated 4 days ago certifying my full cognitive capacity. A printout of the 2 civil suits against the document preparer in Scottsdale, and a printed transcript of the conversation Tara and Logan had in my kitchen in October, pulled from the camera footage. He can't contest it if he's in memory care. That's the whole point. The room went very still. Tara looked at the paper for a long time. Logan made a sound that wasn't quite a word. I've been a forensic accountant for the FBI for 32 years, I said. I follow money. I find the lie underneath the transaction. Did you two actually believe I wouldn't notice? Nobody answered. Diane told them at that point that the federal case was already in progress, that law enforcement was involved, and that anything they said could and likely would be used in proceedings. She advised them to contact their own attorneys immediately. Tara stood up so fast, her chair scraped the tile. Logan sat still, staring at the transcript. He looked up at me with an expression I hadn't seen on his face since he was 11 years old, and I'd caught him lying to me about a broken window. It was the look of someone who had been completely and utterly found out. Dad, he started. Don't, I said. Not angry, just tired. Just don't. The federal case moved faster than I expected. Elder financial abuse at the federal level, conspiracy to commit fraud, and one additional charge that Torres had added after reviewing the medical directive, attempted unlawful confinement, because placing a competent adult in a memory care facility against their will through fraudulent documentation carries criminal weight in Arizona. It's not a common charge. The prosecutor, a methodical man from the Phoenix, U.S., Artemis office named Whitfield, described it to me as the paperwork version of a kidnapping. Logan and Tara hired separate attorneys, which was the first smart thing either of them had done in 2 years. The separation was also predictably the beginning of the end of their marriage. Tara's attorney immediately began laying the groundwork for a defense built on the argument that Logan had orchestrated the scheme and she had simply gone along. Logan's attorney responded by pointing to the camera footage of Tara taking notes on my bank statements. It was not a unified front. The pre-trial hearings were quiet. I attended most of them and sat in the gallery and watched my son and his wife not look at each other. Logan had aged. The tightness around his eyes that I had always associated with nervousness had settled in permanently. Tara still carried herself like someone who expected to get what she wanted, but it was fraying at the edges. Their attorneys filed motions. Whitfield demolished them. The camera footage was admissible, recorded in my own home on my own equipment, with no reasonable expectation of privacy violated, since it was my house, my cameras, and my cloud storage. The financial records were subpoenaed legally. The document preparer in Scottsdale, when it became clear he was facing federal charges himself, agreed to cooperate and testified about the specific instructions Logan had given him. Make it look legitimate, make the POA immediate and irrevocable, and include the memory care placement language. When the preparer testified that Logan had specifically requested language that would make it difficult for me to challenge placement, even if I was still cognitively intact, the courtroom got very quiet. Whitfield called me to the stand toward the end of the prosecution's case. He took me through the timeline carefully, methodically, letting each piece settle before moving to the next. When we got to October, to the kitchen recording, he played it in full. He can't contest it if he's in memory care. That's the whole point. He asked me what I felt when I first heard that conversation. I thought about that for a moment. I felt sad, I said. and I felt like I'd been right about something I'd really hoped to be wrong about. Logan's attorney came at me hard and cross. Did I set a trap? Did I deliberately withhold my concerns to manufacture evidence? Did I want my son prosecuted? I answered every question the same way I'd answered hostile witnesses for 32 years. No, I documented what was happening in my own home. There's a difference. Did I ever simply talk to my son about my concerns? Would you confess to a plan if someone asked you directly? I said. I needed evidence, not a conversation. He pushed harder. Wasn't it possible that Logan was just a worried son making bad decisions? That Tara had manipulated him? It's possible, I said. Tara is manipulative and Logan let himself be manipulated, but being manipulated into a conspiracy doesn't make you innocent of the conspiracy. The attorney had no follow-up. The jury deliberated for 2 days. I sat in my Scottsdale house both evenings and ate dinner alone and did not sleep particularly well. Torres called me the evening of the first day just to check in. I appreciated that. The second afternoon, Whitfield's office called. Verdict reached. The courtroom was packed in the way it gets when a case has been in the local news. Federal judge's son and daughter-in-law attempt elder financial fraud. The Phoenix Gazette had run 2 pieces. I sat in the front row with Diane beside me. Logan and Tara were brought in. They didn't look at each other. They didn't look at me. The jury forewoman was a retired school teacher from Chandler. She has the verdict form with both hands. On the charge of conspiracy to commit elder financial abuse, Logan guilty. Tara guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit wire fraud, Logan guilty. Tara guilty. On the charge of attempted unlawful confinement through fraudulent documentation, Logan guilty. Tara guilty. The schoolteacher from Chandler read each verdict in a clear, even voice. The courtroom erupted after the third one. The judge called for order. Tara had gone white. Logan sat with his elbows on the table and his head down, not moving. I sat quietly and waited until the room settled. Sentencing was 3 weeks later. Whitfield asked for the maximum. Logan's attorney presented the argument that he was a first-time offender who had been psychologically dominated by Tara, that he had a history of being financially irresponsible rather than criminally motivated, that he was capable of rehabilitation. Tara's attorney presented the argument that Logan had initiated the scheme and she had been in an emotionally coercive relationship. The judge, a woman named Martinez, did not appear moved by either argument. Logan, she said, received 14 years in federal prison plus 3 years supervised release. Tara received 11 years. Jointly, they were ordered to pay restitution of $302,000, representing documented legal costs, investigation costs, and the damages calculation that accounted for the documented emotional and psychological impact of a sustained campaign to defraud a parent. The document preparer in Scottsdale, who had cooperated, received 4 years. After the hearing, I walked over to where Logan was standing with his guards. His attorney tried to interpose himself and I waved him off. I needed 1 minute. Logan looked at me. His eyes were red. Whatever I expected to feel standing there. Anger, grief, satisfaction. The clean blank nothing of a closed case. What I actually felt was something older and quieter than any of those. I spent 32 years, I said, watching people convince themselves that money was worth any cost. Smart people. People with families who loved them. And I never once saw it end well. He didn't say anything. You had a father who loved you, I said. You had a house you could have inherited. You had time. You could have waited. You could have just been decent to me for a few more years and eventually gotten everything you wanted. Instead, you researched memory care facilities and drew up documents to have me committed. I paused. I hope the 11 years you'd have had to wait felt worth it. His face crumpled. He started to say something. I didn't wait to hear it. I turned and walked out of the courthouse into the January afternoon and stood in the parking lot for a minute, breathing the dry Phoenix air, and felt the particular exhaustion of something that is finally genuinely over. Doris was waiting outside. She put her hand briefly on my shoulder. Case closed, she said. Case closed, I said. The house sold 4 months later for a $1.1 million to a couple from California with two young kids who'd been priced out of the coastal markets and wanted a good school district. I signed the papers on a Tuesday morning and was in my car by noon. I had already bought a place in Flagstaff. Smaller, 2 bedrooms, a covered porch with a view of the San Francisco peaks, a neighborhood quiet enough that I could hear the wind through the ponderosa pines at night. I paid $480,000 cash. The rest of it I divided 3 ways. A third went to the Arizona Adult Protective Services Foundation, which provides legal resources to elderly victims of financial abuse, because I'd had the knowledge and contacts to protect myself, and most people don't. A third went plus scholarship fund at ASU's law school for students pursuing elder law. And the last third I put into a charitable trust named after my wife, because the house had always been as much hers as mine, and it felt right that her name would be attached to something that helped people instead of a piece of real estate that had accumulated 2 years of bad memories. Logan would have been furious. All the money he'd schemed for, planned for, built a criminal conspiracy around, dispersed, gone, put to use for the exact kind of people he'd tried to victimize. I find I don't feel much about that anymore. Just a sort of tired factual satisfaction, the same feeling I used to get when a financial fraud case finally closed and the numbers added up the way they were supposed to. My first morning in Flagstaff, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and watched the sun come up over the peaks. The air was cold and very clean. A neighbor's dog trotted up the sidewalk and regarded me briefly before moving on. Down the street, someone was shoveling a walkway, normal life, ordinary and unhurried, the kind I hadn't been able to just inhabit for 2 years because I was too busy protecting myself from my own son. I opened my laptop. I'd been keeping notes throughout the whole ordeal, dates, observations, a running log of everything I'd documented. It had started as evidence. It had turned into something closer to a record. Looking at it all laid out, I thought it might be useful to other people, not as a legal guide. I'm an accountant, not an attorney, but as a record of what it looked like when someone you trusted decided your assets were worth more than you were, and how you could see it coming if you knew what to look for. I'm writing it down, taking my time. There's no rush. The peaks were lit orange and then gold, and then a flat, bright white. The coffee was good. The pines moved in the wind. For the first time in 2 years, I had nowhere I needed to be and nothing I needed to prove. And I sat there until the coffee was cold and felt something that I think, after everything, was simply peace. I keep coming back to the moment. Logan stood at my filing cabinet that Saturday morning, not doing anything, just standing there. He startled when he heard me come in. And for about 40 seconds, I believed him when he said he'd just wandered in. 40 seconds. Then something in me that had been trained for 32 years quietly said, no. I've thought a lot about those 40 seconds since. About what it means that I almost let myself be convinced. When someone you love does something wrong, there's a pull in you, a strong one, toward the explanation that lets you keep loving them without complications. I felt that pull. I chose not to follow it. Not because I am cold, but because I had learned the hard way that ignoring what you know to be true doesn't make it untrue. It just makes you unprepared. There's a kind of integrity that doesn't announce itself. It's not the integrity of grand gestures or public declarations. It's the quieter kind. The willingness to see clearly even when what you're seeing breaks your heart, and then to act on what you see rather than on what you wish were true. Logan and Tara had every opportunity to make a different choice. Not once, not twice, at every stage of what they were planning, there was a moment where they could have stopped. They didn't stop because they told themselves the reward was worth it. That's how it always works. The lie you tell yourself about the prize is always bigger than the lie you tell yourself about the cost. What I did wasn't complicated. I paid attention. I kept records. I called people I trusted. I prepared for a contingency I hoped would never arrive. None of that required any special strength. It required honesty with myself first about what I was seeing, and then the patience to let the truth do its own work rather than trying to force a confrontation before I had solid ground to stand on. Patience is underrated. People think of it as passive. It isn't. Sitting in my bedroom watching that camera feed at 11:30 at night, watching my son photograph my bank statements, and choosing not to go downstairs, that took more discipline than anything I did in 32 years behind a desk. The outcome wasn't satisfying in the way people might expect. There was no moment where I felt triumphant. What I felt mostly was tired. And then, slowly, over the weeks that followed, something lighter. Not happiness exactly, just the absence of the weight I'd been carrying since that first Thanksgiving when my daughter-in-law asked about my brokerage accounts, and I filed it away in the back of my mind and hoped I was wrong. I think about the people who go through what I went through without the professional background I had, without the contacts, without the trending to recognize a pattern, without knowing how to document what they were seeing. They lose everything, their homes, their savings, sometimes their freedom, because someone they trusted decided those things were worth more than they were. That's why the money went where it went. Not as a message to Logan, just because it seemed like the right use of it. I'm 68 years old. I'm starting over in a house with a porch that faces a mountain range and a neighborhood quiet enough to think in. It's not what I planned for this stage of my life. But I know who I am. I know what I stood for, and I can account for every decision I made. That's not nothing. In the end, that might be everything.